Now, you may remember earlier this year, I spoke to Barry Druitt-Barlow about his plans to set up a British surrogacy centre to help couples who, like him and his partner Tony, wanted to pay a surrogate to have a baby and then bring the child back to the UK. It's illegal in this country to pay a woman for the hire of her womb. She can only receive expenses. But it's possible in California, the Ukraine and India. And increasing numbers of British couples are said to be following the path taken by the Druitt-Barlows and Elton John. In order for the child to be imported, a British judge has to award a parental order to sanction a practice which is considered unacceptable in this country. Mr. Justice Hadley has told the World at One that he's unhappy with this legal fudge.
Commercial surrogacy is a highly controversial matter ethically. And at the end of the day, by the time the case gets to me, the best I can do normally is focus on the welfare of the child. If that means that the will of Parliament has been subverted, well, that is, I think, a matter that Parliament would have to address.
You have expressed concerns now in judgments going back several years, but the same issues seem to be coming up again and again, and it seems nothing has been resolved.
Well, I think one of the reasons I was very happy to talk in an interview like this was because exactly that clearly a number of matters that have been raised haven't found their way into the public domain, and a number of people have found themselves getting themselves into a mess unnecessarily and their children into a mess unnecessarily. So hence the desire to say something.
Mr. Justice Hadley talked to John Minnell. So should Parliament be persuaded to address this question? Well, Dr. Anna Smydor is a lecturer in ethics at the University of East Anglia's Medical School. Kim Cotton became a surrogate mother in 1985. And Natalie Gamble is the lawyer who acted for a couple who recently brought a baby from the Ukraine. Natalie, how risky is this for the child? How likely is a judge to say no to the parents applying for a parental order?
Well, with the law as it currently is, I mean, as Mr. Justice Headley has been saying, it's actually very difficult for the court to refuse a parental order, because by the time the court is looking at the situation, the child has already been born and clearly needs protecting. And the difficulty that parents face is often that the law in the destination country where they're going doesn't match up with the law here back in the UK. So you can end up in a situation where a child is born without any legal parents anywhere in the world, and without any nationality rights. And clearly then, if the court doesn't take action to regularise the position, they remain in that stateless and parentless state, which is obviously, a terrible outcome to think of for any child.
So there wouldn't be any question of a child being sent back because it wouldn't have parents or a state to be sent back to.
Absolutely, and the family court's paramount consideration is the welfare of the child, quite rightly.
Kim, how did your surrogacy work in 85 when commercial transactions are illegal here?
Well, it was only made illegal in 1985. I gave birth in January through an American agency operating here for the first time, and it was the birth of baby Cotton in January that forced the law to be pushed through to ban commercial surrogacy in the July. So, it was the first case that was tested in that way. So commercial surrogacy was banned here. But, we set up COTS in 1986, I think, and, we operate to help childless couples as much as we can in the UK, and those that do want to go to California, to Bill Handel's agency in there, it is very expensive but very, very professional. Offers a total package where the surrogate, you can your name is put onto the birth certificate during the pregnancy, so there's none of this adopting your own child after the birth.
But you would still have to have a parental order to bring the child into this country, would you not?
Let's
check with
sure.
Natalie.
I'm not sure
you?
on that one.
Yeah, you do. The English law won't recognise the foreign system, so even if you're recognised on the birth certificate there, you'll still need a parental order in order to become the parents here. The question of whether you can bring the baby back in the meantime is quite a complicated one and depends on the immigration position, which varies from case to case. But most people do bring children back first, but then they will still need a parental order even if their position is fully secured in the foreign destination.
Anna, this is clearly a difficult area of law, and no judge wants to leave a baby at the border stateless and parentless. Why has this country been reluctant to go down the commercial route?
I think there were some big concerns about the ethics of surrogacy, and when the law was being discussed, it seemed best to take a position that it would be very intrusive to try and illegalize surrogacy altogether. But the law tries to dissuade people from entering into surrogacy arrangements, and that's partly because people feel very uneasy about the idea of hiring someone's womb. And I think even some of the terms that have been mentioned already today, such as professional and total package, just don't sit easily with people's ideas about what it is to give birth to a baby, to reproduce, or to become a parent. So I think that's why the law is cautious on this. It may have been perhaps too cautious in some respects.
Kim, I mean, using those words, professional and total package, and we know that you can go to California and you can look at a catalogue, you can select a model who has the right colour hair, the right kind of eyes, and you can pay her thousands of dollars to produce a child for you. To what extent does that make you feel uncomfortable?
I don't think it does particularly. I think everyone has a very strange view of what surrogates actually are. You know, I think some people think that we're uneducated, ignorant, desperate for money, clutching at how can we make money, and some sort of mercenary bitch. And we're just not like that, and it just isn't like that, surrogacy. Surrogacy in the UK is a very informal arrangement where people meet, they get to know each other, and there's a bond that grows up.
Yeah, but Kim, hang on a minute. I know that this happens because the Druitt Barlows told me that it happens, that you can select your surrogate mother from a catalogue. Now, you're talking about what happens in the UK. If we went down the commercial road, would we not inevitably follow what's happening in California?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you know, when surrogacy goes wrong in the UK, one of the reasons I left surrogacy and was driven out, I should say, by the media was because when it goes wrong, my neck was in the noose, always in the firing line. I just couldn't take any more of it, because at the end of the day, it's about individuals taking responsibility for their own actions. We have guidelines that are set up, and if people breach those and go their own route, then they will get into trouble. It's very, very fraught with danger. But if it's done properly, guidelines are followed, people have this wonderful relationship with their surrogate, it can go very, very well, and it's very lasting. You know, I have twins that I had through IVF surrogacy in the UK here. You know, they're going to be over 20 this month, and, you know, we have a wonderful relationship. And a wonderful relationship with their parents. It's ongoing.
But Natalie, what kind of things can go wrong with commercial surrogacy arrangements?
Well, I mean, I think I would sort of support what Kim's saying about the fact that, you know, you can have very positive relationships between parents and surrogate mothers, even where the environment is a commercial one. And obviously there are different practices in places all over the world. But, you know, certainly in many US states where they allow commercial surrogacy, the process of matching between the surrogates and the parents is often dealt with very carefully indeed, so that people, you know, meet each other and form a relationship, and it isn't as cold and calculating and as commercial as people often get the impression.
Absolutely.
And, you know, where things are dealt with very professionally and there's a lot of support for everybody, I think, you know, the most important thing, and to make sure that things don't go wrong, is to provide that support for all sides, make sure that everybody's properly counselled and properly advised, so that they're going into things with their eyes open. And I think where that happens, you have the best chance of a really, really positive relationship that endures not just through the pregnancy but beyond as well.
Anna, what concerns do you have about things going wrong?
One of my concerns is that despite the best precautions that people can take, and however carefully you try to manage the situation, that there are a lot of things that can arise along the way that weren't foreseen, and that you can't simply forestall by careful planning. So,
like
for example,
what?
If a surrogate is found to be carrying a child that has Down syndrome, what happens then? There have been cases in the US where this has happened. And that puts you in a very difficult ethical position with regard to the contract that you've entered into. In the US, what has happened is that the commissioning parents want the surrogate to abort the child. The surrogate may not want to, even if perhaps she had agreed to do so in the small print. Other issues have been where there's been a multiple pregnancy, but the commissioning parents only want one or two of the embryos or the fetuses that are currently being gestated. Now, I think these are things that you don't necessarily foresee, and even if you do foresee them, the idea that a pregnant woman is contractually obliged to selectively abort some of her fetuses is ethically challenging, I think, however robust the situation is, the documentation and the rest of it.
So, Anna, what should Parliament decide? Should it look at this again and make a different decision or not?
I think currently the law is being made a bit of an ass of, and I don't think that's a good situation. I think the problem has arisen because the law makes the assumption that there is a clear distinction between reasonable expenses and commercial payments. In practice, it's very hard to say what is a reasonable payment for 9 months of pregnancy, childbirth, and then giving the baby to its commissioning parents. Who can really set a fair expense on that? So I think the distinction between expenses and payments is really very hard to sustain. What I would say is that currently the law says it's illegal to enter into commercial arrangements. I think we just can't sustain that. I think we should change our policy with regard to that, but stick to the rest of the UK's law, which I think is quite enlightened. So in the UK, if you've entered a surrogacy arrangement, it will be up to the discretion of the judge whether you get your court order or not. So that's not going to be changed whether or not paying is legal or illegal. The judge is not the judge's hands are not forced by the fact that you've entered into the arrangement. If the welfare of the child seems to dictate that it stays with the birth mother, then that will happen. So I think that's a good safeguard.
Anna Smidor, Natalie Gamble and Kim Cotton, thank you all very much indeed.